Hey, thank you for the introduction, Dr. Kimrod. I am Chad Abbott. I'm a PhD student under Dr. Eric Prosco at the University of Georgia. This morning, I'd like to talk to you about the peanut variety response to brake herbicide. I want to go through a brief outline, give an introduction. I'd like to cover our statement of objective, look at our hypothesis, move into our materials and methods, review our results, look at our summary of results, look at some similar work done by others in our future research, and be happy to answer any questions. So Palmer amaranth is the most troublesome weed in peanut production, according to Webster et al. In 2005. Burke et al. In 2007 concluded that one Palmer amaranth plant per row meter can have predicted yield losses of 28%. So recently, Culpepper et al. In 2020 has documented PPO-resistant Palmer amaranth in the state of Georgia from post-emergent applications, which adds to Palmer amaranth already being resistant to glyphosate and ALS herbicides. It is confirmed that Palmer amaranth is resistant to several group 14 PPO herbicides, which are applied post-emergent in the Mid-South region, which are heavy in soybean and cotton production systems. So Valor, the active ingredient flumioxazin, is a major pre-emergence PPO herbicide that has been utilized in peanut production in Georgia since about 2001, and data suggests that it's applied across 74% of the 831,000 acres being grown in the state of Georgia. So research conducted with Valor elucidate that it has a good safety of a 2x rate safety margin and excellent Palmer control when used properly. And the benefits of pre-emergent herbicides reduce 95% or more of the weed pressure that need to be controlled for post-emergent herbicide applications. However, the longer that we rely on this class of chemistry, the increased chance of creating further resistance issues. So it is imperative that we continue to evaluate new mode of actions that can be applied pre-emergent in peanut to continue being effective in managing problematic weeds. So do we have an underutilized mode of action available for peanuts? So Georgia accounts for about 50% of the nation's peanut production, with, as I mentioned previously, around 831,000 acres being grown. Peanut acreage nationally is minimal when compared to the amount of corn, beans, and cotton being produced. So with that being said, peanut producers still have to manage their crop for all of the same problematic weeds that are encountered in these other major row crops. However, there is little motivation for primary herbicide development specific for peanut. So I want to bring to light, which has the active ingredient fluridone, and it is a systemic pre-emergent herbicide, which was initially developed for aquatic weed control, which is known as Sonar. The same active ingredient is labeled in cotton production for weed control with a labeled use rate of 16 ounces per acre. Brake has a WSSA group 12 mode of action, and that works by blocking the carotenoid biosynthesis by inhibiting phytoene desaturase. So what all that means is that when this happens, the inhibition that occurs in susceptible plants leads to bleaching, chlorosis, necrosis, and eventually plant death. So fluridone is currently underutilized in row crop production and does not have a label in peanut production outside of Arkansas, in which they filed for a Section 18 in May of 2021. So, and this occurred because of their weed resistance issues. So in order to gain a successful label for brake in peanut, we need to thoroughly test its impact on commercial peanut variety tolerance at several use rates, evaluate its efficacy in controlling problematic broadleaf weeds and grasses, and lastly, due to the diversity that of crops being grown in Georgia, we need to understand if there are any rotational restrictions that may occur. But for the premise of this presentation, I want to focus on brake and its effects on 3 commercial peanut varieties. So the statement of objective for our research was to determine the effects of brake when applied pre-emergent at 4 herbicide rates on the growth and development of 3 commercial peanut varieties. Looking at our research hypothesis is that brake will have a 2x rate safety margin on 3 peanut varieties when using 16 ounces per acre as our potential labeled 1x rate. Moving into our materials and methods, research was conducted in 2019 and 2020 in Tukey-Kramer, Georgia. Treatments were arranged in a randomized complete block design with 4 applications. It is a 3x4 factorial arrangement with 3 varieties and 4 rates of fluridone. Plots were planted on a twin row configuration on small plot beds, which measured 6 by 25 feet. All plots were maintained weed-free using pre-emergent applications of pendimethalin and diclosulam, along with season-long hand weeding as necessary. The commercial peanut varieties that we used in our study were Georgia 06G, Georgia 16HO, and Georgia 18RU. Georgia 06G is planted on about 85 to 88% of the acres in Georgia, and it is our commercial standard. But following the suggested use rate of break in cotton, our proposed 1X rate is 16 ounces per acre. We wanted to evaluate our 2X rate of 32 ounces per acre, and we wanted to evaluate a 4X rate of 64 ounces per acre, along with a non-treated control. Herbicide treatments were applied one day after planting using a CO2-powered backpack sprayer, which was calibrated to deliver 15 gallons per acre at 40 PSI using 110 O2 AIXR nozzles. All of our plots were watered in with 1/2 inch of water, overhead irrigation, following our herbicide applications. Continuing on with materials and methods, we collected several in-season plant metrics evaluating plant stand, bleaching, stunting, plant heights, widths, and lapping data and yield. However, for the interest of time, I'll only be presenting the stand data, bleaching percentages, and yield. For plant stand, I want to show you that data which we were collected from 28 to 34 days after application. We assessed peanut bleaching with ratings from emergent until symptomology was no longer visible. But today I'll show you the data that we collected from 30 to 34 days after application. All of our yield data was adjusted to 10% moisture. We subjected all of our data to analysis of variance using PROC GLIMMIX and SAS 9.4. Our means were separated using the Tukey-Kramer HST method using a p-value of 0.05. All of our results and data are presented by year. So moving into our results. But before we get into the charts, I want to go over this table briefly to help with contextualizing some of the variation that we experienced between 2019 and 2020. And I briefly want to touch on the weather in 2021. So I want to point out that break is strongly absorbed to soil organic matter. Therefore, the adsorption-desorption coefficients correlate well with soil organic matter content. However, we have very little of that. So in 2019, our daily average maximum and minimum air temperatures were vastly warmer than our 2020 weather in the first 30 days after planting. Our soil temperatures were also much warmer in 2019 than in 2020. So breaking it down a little further, if you look at the differences in total rainfall, there was over twice as much rainfall in 2020 than in the previous year, but there were not much difference in irrigation totals. But when you consolidate the rainfall and irrigation data to the first 2 weeks when peanuts are trying to crack and emerge from the soil, 83% of the total irrigation and rainfall occurred within 14 days after planting in 2009. In 2020, there was significantly less irrigation and rainfall when looking at the first 2 weeks after planting. And looking at our 2021 weather, we experienced similar conditions to our 2020 year and within the first 30 days after planting. But for the rest of the results, I will be focusing on 2019 and 2020. So moving into our peanut stand data, again, this time frame 28 to 34 days after application. Plant stand are represented in plants per 5 foot on the y-axis. We have rates along our x-axis, and this is across by variety, average across by variety. 2019 data will be represented by the yellow bars with letters of significance in the upper end. And again, 2020 data will be represented by our blue bars, and that is consistent through the rest of the presentation. So if looking at the 2019 data, the 32 ounce and 64 ounce rates had significant reductions in overall plant stand at this time frame, which continued through the rest of the year. Those stand losses correlate to about a 32 and 64% stand reduction. And looking at 2020 data compared to our non-treated control, we only had significant stand reductions at our 64 ounce rate, which correlate to about a 24% reduction in overall stand. So why did this occur? Can we correlate that to the 2019 data being warm and wet with rapid absorption of break into the peanut plants where we got significant injury? Or can we correlate that to the 2020 data where we were a little bit cooler, a little bit drier within the first 2 weeks after planting when those peanuts are trying to rapidly emerge from the soil profile? So that's to be determined, but that gives us a good cause for our results that we'll get into. I want to highlight this aerial photograph here taken 67 days after planting in 2019. You can see the injury that occurred at our upper two rates across varieties when replicated through the field. The varieties are on the left with our rates followed by the yellow numbers next to the plots. And it's just a visual representation of the injury that occurred in the 2019 growing season. Looking at foliar bleaching by rate, this is percent bleaching on our y-axis. Again, The 2019 data is in yellow. And we had significant bleaching when averaged across variety when looking at our rates, at all rates above our non-treated control. At this time frame, we had about 20 to 32% bleaching. When looking at our 2020 data, we had significant bleaching compared to our non-treated control at our 32 to 64 ounce rates. However, this injury is transient as the season progressed and those plants developed. Looking at foliar bleaching in the same time frame, when by variety, again along our x-axis, when it's averaged across our rates, again percent bleaching on our y-axis, we had significant bleaching when looking at our Georgia 16HO variety compared to our Georgia 18RU variety in 2019, with Georgia 06G being somewhere in the middle. Looking at our 2020 data, Georgia 16HO again showing significantly more bleaching when averaged across rates in comparison to our other two varieties. There was a little bit less injury with Georgia 06G in 2020 and similar to our Georgia 18RU. Looking at this slide here, I want to highlight some of the injury that we were noticing during the growing season. This is our Georgia 16HO variety 20 days after planting at our 4X rate. Just want to show in the left picture here. So you can see that the plant in the front side of the picture is nearly white. And if you look to the picture on the right, it's the same plot, same rate, just 20 days later in the season. You can see that the plants are developing nicely. However, this injury is still present, but it is reduced. And so that just goes to show that this injury is transient throughout the season. Moving into our yield results, again, yield is represented in pounds per acre on our y-axis with rates along our x-axis. 2019, we had significant reductions in yield at our 32 and 64 ounce rates, which correlate to 18 to 54% yield losses. Looking at our 2020 data, we had significant reductions in yield at our 64 ounce rates, which correlate to a 12% yield loss. And so can we go back and think about the weather data that we were experiencing in 2019 and 2020 during the early part of the season and how that affects us all the way through until harvest? So in summary, I want to highlight again the weather variability with being warm and wet early in the season for the first 2 weeks after planting and a little bit cooler and drier. Our stand was definitely impacted at a 32 and 64 ounce rates in 2019, and we had not significant stand reductions at our 2X rate in 2020. Looking at our bleaching, Georgia 16HO was consistently showed significantly more bleaching at these time frames in comparison to Georgia 18RU, with Georgia 06G being somewhere in the middle in 2019 and a little bit less bleaching in 2020. Looking at our yield results again, we had 18 to 54% in 2019 at our proposed 2 and 4X rates. Even though we don't recommend it, it does happen. Looking at our 2020, we had a 2X rate safety margin, which is not different than our non-treated control. However, we had significant yield reductions of 12% at 64 ounces per acre. So in summary of our results, we need to continue to investigate rates that are less than 16 ounces per acre because we do need repeatable 2X safety margins. No, we don't recommend 2X rates, but it does happen. There are documented cases year in, year out. So it's just imperative that we have a consistent safety margin. And looking at revisiting our hypothesis, in 2019, we do reject our hypothesis. In 2020, we failed to reject our hypothesis. Looking at some research compared to others, Gretcher et al. Looking at weed control and peanut response to fluridone using Georgia 13M variety in the arid regions of Texas and the South region and around Lubbock. And there was a research done by Hale et al. In 2020 looking at the efficacy of brake, herbicide, Mississippi, and peanut. However, looking at this research compared to others, we are lacking broader scope of varietal tolerance, and we're lacking regional data for our Georgia producers. So looking at future research, we are continuing this trial again in 2021. We're investigating 4 additional varieties with Auburn AU NPL 17, looking at TIF NV HIOL, looking at Georgia 20 VHO, and looking at Flow Run 331. We are continuing to refine our application rates and making sure that we have a consistent 2X rate safety margin for those labeling requirements. And we are evaluating weed control with various tank mixes and weed management systems. At this time, this concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chad. We have time for questions. Any questions for Chad this morning? Okay. Well, Chad, that is the end of our 15 minutes. So I want to thank you for your presentation, and thanks for participating this afternoon or this morning with us.